welcome everyone. My name is Pam Scott, and I am with Oasis Solutions. I'm the Director of Client Services, and I will be conducting your webinar today. What we're going to be talking about today is period end and year end processing, and your settings and the order in which you close modules. So I wanted to start by saying that anytime if I say Sage 100, instead of saying Sage 100 Cloud, those terms for today's purposes are interchangeable, because what we're talking about today applies to whether you're on Sage 100 or you're on Sage 100C or Sage 100 Cloud. And also, I did a little housekeeping in the very beginning saying that I will stop during the presentation and see if anyone has questions. And if you do, just use the question box and submit those, and I will answer as many of those as I can during today's allotted time. If we do run out of time, I will still follow up with you after the presentation and answer those questions. So again, I do apologize for some of the audio difficulties in the very beginning. So what we're going to start taking a look at initially is in Sage 100, I'm going to show you where the modules store the current fiscal year and current period information so that you know what period you're closing. So what I was showing is, to use the general ledger example in the setup, if you look at the GL options, and again, I'm using demo data, so a lot of my information is in a future period. Yours obviously, especially if you're on a calendar year, should not be saying that it's 2020. So if I'm on a calendar year, this is basically saying that my general ledger thinks it's May of 2020. That's the current period that I have open. And then when I do a period end processing, I don't go in here and change this. I actually go through the period end, which I'll show you shortly, and then it automatically then increments this to period 6. Also, most modules have an area where you tell it how long you want to retain history. And in the general ledger module, it asks how long you want to retain your GL history. And as most of you know, you really should be keeping the GL history for at least 7 years. If you're audited, you need to go back. But you can keep it for a minimum of 1 year, or you can go up to 99 years. What happens is when this setting is set, so if I made a mistake and I actually set this to 1 year, when I get to the end of my calendar year or the end of my fiscal year, and I do the year-end processing, it is going to go, Sage is going to come back and take a look at the setting, and it's going to say, okay, they only want to keep their GL history for 1 year, so we're going to look at their GL history, and anything that is more than 1 year ago, we're going to purge out of the system. So you certainly would not want to purge out everything but the last year. So you want to make sure that your setting is for as long as you want to keep it. And if you're one of those that wants to keep history forever, you certainly can set this to 99 years. Now, if you have an incorrect setting and you do year end and it purges out your data and you realize it, there is no way to unpurge that data. So it is strongly recommended that you get a good backup before you do your period end processing. Because if you do make a mistake, then the only way to fix that situation is to do a restore from backup. So again, I'm just going to kind of just summarize some of the modules for you so that you can see the settings. And then we're going to talk about the order in which you do the close. So we're going to look at AR, and we're going to look at the options. And you can see here, again, that it shows the current fiscal year and period. But you don't see anything on this screen about how long to keep history. But you'll notice that I have a history tab, and then that is where this information is set up. So for AR, I have the number of years that I want to retain my cash receipts history. I have the number of years to retain customer history as well as salesperson. And those do not have to be consistent. I could be saving 1 2 years, 1 5 years, 1 3 years. I can have a variety there. But again, once you close accounts receivable, Sage is going to come out and take a look at these settings to know at what point to start purging the information. So most of the modules that you use do have a period end or a year end processing. One exception to that rule, bank reconciliation does not have any type of period end. And some of the kind of global features like paperless office, visual integrator, custom office, obviously those don't have any type of period end. But any other module where you are performing transactions does have a period end associated with it. So if you do not consistently close periods, which a lot of clients don't do this, or maybe you are new in the position and no one had ever mentioned to you that you needed to close a period. If you go in and see that your accounts receivable period is still set to, period 3 of 2019, you would just want to get current. You would just go through and do a period in processing to close March. Then you would do another period in processing to close April, and so forth and so on. You can't do them all at once. You do have to do them individually. Again, before you do that, you want to go into each module's options and see how long you're retaining history, and then making sure that you do have a good backup. So when you're ready to perform a year end or period end, before you can close a module, close a period, all of your transactions within that module have to be up to date. So if I have any unposted AR invoices, or I have a cash receipts in process, and I try to go in to do period end, it is going to give me a warning and say it's unable to perform period end processing while cash receipts deposit is in progress, AR invoice data entry. So you're going to get a warning. Whoops, sorry. You're going to get a warning with that. It's going to require you to go in and update those transactions before you will be allowed to do any type of period end processing. And that is across the board for every module. The other thing is we wanted to talk about today, and I'm actually going to put up on the screen shortly, we're going to talk about the order in which you should close your modules. So, but if you think about it this way, you first close any module that transfers information into another module. So an example of that would be that the sales order module transfers when you do a transaction. It can update information to the inventory management module. It can update information to the accounts receivable module, and it can update information to the general ledger. So because of how that flows down, the proper order to close those would be that you would start with the sales order module. So, you want to kind of think about that order, and the last thing that you would be closing would be the general ledger. Now, a lot of folks keep the general ledger open after the end of the year, so that after they have their audit or they get their year-end adjustments, they can go in and make those adjustments. Occasionally, if you have closed the general ledger year, we will advise you that it's okay to reopen it and do those transactions and then close it again. But we want to make sure that it's being done properly. You should not ever reopen any other module. Once you have completed the period end processing, then you should not be arbitrarily going back into those option screens and then changing that fiscal year or fiscal period. So does anybody have any questions about that? If you do, go ahead and type those in. Some of you may be saying, well, I never close a period, does that hurt anything? Technically, the short answer is no, it really doesn't hurt anything, with the exception of if you're trying to run period-to-date reports, those numbers may be skewed, especially if you're on an older version. It definitely would skew those numbers. In more recent versions, it does typically put the periods in the proper buckets, but we can't guarantee that those period-to-date numbers would be correct. And it's just good to make sure that your staff isn't going in and posting transactions to the wrong year. They make a typo and they're supposed to be posting something to February of 2020 and they type in February of 2019. Well, if you still have those periods open, it's going to let them post to that prior period. So I don't see any questions. So what I want to show you now is when you go in to do a period end, each module also has a period end report selection. And these are reports that it recommends that you print before you actually do the closing. You are not required to do all of these reports. So if you're saying, well, I really don't need a monthly sales report, I can highlight that report and then I can actually remove it from the list. If I don't track anything by salesperson, I can remove that. So you're not required to print, 5, 10, or 15 reports. You're only print the reports that you need. But it is a good habit to go ahead and get those reports. Obviously you can print a hard copy. You can export them out to a PDF if you want to. But each time you go to do period end, it is going to say, hey, it's time to run these reports. You're going to run those reports, and then you're going to go into the period end processing. And let me see if we can get here real quick. Okay. So I'm looking at the accounts payable module now, and you'll notice it didn't pop up a warning that said I had unposted transactions. So when all of your transactions have been posted, you're going to get this type of message. It's going to say the module name period end is going to be performed for the period 5 ending in this date. This date pulls from how you have your fiscal year set up in the general ledger, and then the period 5 is the period associated with this date. It says whether or not you want to print these period end reports. I'm not going to do that for today's purposes, so I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to click the proceed button, and it kind of gives me another chance to say, period 5 is going to be changed to period 6. You have not printed your report yet. Are you sure you want to complete this? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. It's going to go through its process. It may take a little bit longer for your system because I have very little data in this system. It's going to go through. It's going to have purged out any history that I had in my settings. And if I go back in and look at my AP options, instead of it being period 5, it is now period 6. So does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. If not, I'm going to pull up a document, and if anybody wants a copy of this, feel free to take a screenshot, or if it's something you're not able to, or do a snip of it. If you can't do that, let me know, and I will be glad to forward this information to you. But as a rule, this is the general recommended order of closing modules. Now, obviously, if you don't use these modules, don't worry about them. It was only going to be the modules that are applicable to you. Now, I will say that there's an exception to the rule as far as payroll is concerned. Payroll has a quarter-end processing, and everything else has period end. So we do have some questions, so hold on just a second. Stephanie is asking, can we still see everything? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, Stephanie. If you could clarify that just a little bit. And the next question is what if period end has been changed manually without doing the period end process? The answer to that is, I think the only, Crystal, I'm not sure what version of Sage you're running. I think if you ran reports that was grabbing period to date information, or possibly even year to date, out of some of the canned reports, those might possibly be skewed. What I would suggest is that if you have been doing it that way in the past, that you do not do that going forward. By just changing the period in the setup options, one of the things that does not happen at that point is the purging of history. So you definitely want to double check your settings first before you start purging them, or before you start doing the closings. So I think that's the only thing probably that it wouldn't be doing is purging that information. I'm going to get to Stephanie's question real quick, and then I'll get to follow up with you, Crystal. So Stephanie says, can we still see everything, meaning the history of the invoices? You can still pull that information in most places. If you go to an inquiry, you can pull that information. As far as being able to, so let's say for an example, let me go back to the Sage for just a second. So I'm going to go to accounts receivable, and we're going to talk about this option real quick. In accounts receivable, the number of years to retain the customer history, or to keep invoices, let's say from AP, when it removes them from history, what it's mainly removing them from would be the customer maintenance. So in customer maintenance, wait a minute, in customer maintenance where you have the invoice tab, that is where it's going to be removed from. So you are not going to be able to see it on this screen or be able to drill down into it. You still will probably be able to go in and pull an invoice history report for those modules. In the newer version, it does keep information in that area until you physically do a purge where you're going into the utilities and telling it to purge AR history. So it's mainly purging it from your vendor screen or your customer screen. Oops. Um, so to answer the question, will the webinar be available online? The answer to that is yes. And also, if you have registered, you will receive a follow-up email when the recording is available with a link. So Crystal, to see if there's a way that you can determine the last time a period end was run, it depends on how long ago you think it might be. If you go into the library master module and go to reports and go to the activity log, it is going, now I just did that AP period end, so it is going to show me when I did the period end. And it's showing me the period that was closed. So depending on how far back your activity log goes, you can see that. Now the activity log basically kind of refreshes itself with each upgrade. So let's say that you upgraded your Sage software January 1st of 2019, then your history is only going to go back that far in the activity log. So it looks like I installed this version in February, and of course with demo data I'm not doing a lot of transactions. But you can tell that with the activity log. And if you go and click on your activity log and it doesn't open immediately like mine did, it could have a ton of information in it. So I have seen that report run very slowly, so you just have to be patient and it will eventually pop up. All right. Let's see if there's any other questions. So I think that's all of the questions at the moment. So feel free to raise your hand, though, if you do have any additional questions. I was talking a little bit about payroll is on a quarterly basis. And looks like it said there was another question, but I'm not seeing anything pop up. So if you do have anything else, let me know. And let's see, anything, another one. Okay, so Raina is asking, it says, we run payroll weekly, and we do have a payroll on January 2nd. So what actions do we need to do for that payroll? For those of you that have been working with Oasis for a while, we actually, there's a couple of things of information that you're going to be getting very soon that's going to explain all of that. Number one is that we help folks prepare for year end by creating historical companies and copying the data over and making sure that you have everything prepared before you close the end of the year. Because payroll is, if you're on versions 2017 and lower, you have to create a historical company before you close out the year because you have to do that first payroll. So number one, the emails are going to be going to everyone next week on the 20th of November that outlines all of this information. It is also going to give you links to year-end webinars specifically related to processing payrolls, W-2s, and creating those historical companies and what needs to happen to prepare. And then there will be another session on 1099 printing and what you need to do to prepare for that as well. So you're going to have links. There's going to be webinars on December the 3rd as well as December the 10th. And both of those are free. We're going to have an AP and a payroll webinar on the 3rd, and an AP and a payroll webinar on the 10th. So if you can't make one day, you have the next day, and then those will be recorded as well. So, Raina, if you want more information, you can contact me offline, but all of that information will be going out to all of our clients on the 20th. So, in fact, some folks have already called to schedule those appointments, so we're going to get that emailer out a little earlier than we normally do. Any more questions before I move forward with anything? So we're going to go back, I'm going to go back to this list, and again, if you want to get screenshots of this, feel free to go ahead. But payroll is an exception to making sure that at the very end of the year, you cannot just arbitrarily close payroll if you are on a version lower than 2018, because it will purge out your information and you won't be able to print your W-2s. For those of you that do inventory, I know a lot of folks do physical counts at the end of the year. If you are new to inventory, or you only do this physical count once a year and it's hard to remember how to do things, I would strongly suggest that you get in touch with us prior to the physical count so that we can kind of walk you through and make sure that you know the proper steps in doing that, and just so that you can kind of be prepared versus running an issue at a last second and calling for support when typically at the end of the year our response time is a little bit longer because we do have a much heavier call volume. So any of these period end issues, it's better to be proactive and be prepared than to be reactive. So if that's a possibility, keep that in mind as well. And then go back to Sage. So again, you know, we've talked about the various modules, what you go through for period end. It's going to note on the general ledger if it knows whether it's a period or the end of the year. And again, you do get that warning and says, hey, are you sure you want to go through with this? So obviously you want to, if you're ready, say yes, but have a good backup, check your settings beforehand, and make sure that you're keeping your history for the right amount of time. If you do purge that history accidentally, there's no way, you can't just go into the setup and change the month back to the prior month. Doing that does not bring back that history, so you will have to restore from a backup. We've pretty much covered everything related to just the order of closing the modules and that process. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that Word document back up, and I'm going to leave it open for anybody else that may have any last-minute questions. And then just to kind of reiterate, you will be getting emails on the 20th that are related specifically to payroll or assistance with 1099s, so that will be coming out. And then you also will be getting emails, separate emails in addition to that, with the links to our year-end processing webinars. So I'll leave it open for another couple of minutes, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them. Okay, we have another question here. What is the consequence to closing the modules in the incorrect order? The only consequence to that would be, so let's say that you use sales order and inventory, and you close the accounts receivable before you close sales order. Okay, so let's say you close accounts receivable, Then you go to close sales order, and it says you can't close the period because you have unposted invoices. Well, you want to post those invoices, but it's not going to hit the AR in the same period. So you may have invoices from October that you forgot to post, but you've already closed October in accounts receivable, so it's going to hit November. So from that standpoint, it's going to, your AR aging report and your trial balance would not match because they would have different posting dates. So that's really the major consequence of that. And then obviously you wouldn't want to close your general ledger first, because then anything you try to post in any subsidiary modules cannot post to the general ledger in a closed period. So let me know if that answers your question there, Rhonda. And okay, great. And Dion, thank you for the feedback. I'll leave it open again for just a couple more minutes to see if anybody else has any questions. So if anybody wants to follow up after the webinar with questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is pam@oasisky.com. And I can't honestly believe that we're already talking about year end. That seems kind of crazy to me, but with the weather, it certainly feels like it's year end. So I don't have any other questions, so I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. And I look forward to, whoops, we have one more. This is, what if you close the month of September for the general ledger, but in October you have to reopen it to record another September entry? In the general ledger, it is much more forgiving than your other modules, so you can go in and reopen that in the options under the general ledger setup options. Do your September entry and then do another period in processing. So again, the general ledger is a little more forgiving, but you don't want to get in a habit of that, but I do understand that can happen. So I'll wait for just a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any additional questions. I would encourage you that if you do process 1099s or W-2s, that you do attend one of our year-end webinars in December. If you have always wanted to do 1099s in Sage, or you do it outside of Sage, during that presentation, we're going to talk about how to set up your vendors to start tracking that information. So the end of the year is a good time to get that set up and start tracking everything for 2020. So feel free to sign up for those. So I don't have any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end today's session. And again, thank you everyone for attending, and just please follow up if there's anything else that we can help you with. Thank you.